Good morning. We are going to have a discussion this morning. I'm Della Wells, Rector of Emmanuel Church, Newport, and we welcome all of you who are watching today. Many of our parishioners, I hope, and if those of you out there have been joining us in online worship and would like to support Emmanuel Church, we certainly welcome you to join in that and hope you will be part of our community, both our worshiping community and our support community. We're glad you're with us. I bring you this morning Dave Monroe, our treasurer at Emmanuel Church, and the famous Lil Hargrove, who has been senior warden many times and served in every capacity of leadership at Emmanuel. And Lil, we're really glad to have her with us this morning. And you'll notice that she is, oddly enough, before a computer screen. This may be a first. So this is a really exciting day for those of us who love and know Lil's computer habits. So this is all great. But Dave and Lil, I know we'll have a great conversation. Numbers aren't always easy for people, but this is a way to understand our life together and our operations, our ministry, and the cost of maintaining that, what it takes for us to keep Emmanuel Church functioning. Thank you for this day and this conversation.
Good morning. What I've done as the treasurer is tried to put together an explanation of how our finances work, how we accomplish our ministry, which is, we all know, is profoundly embedded in the worship that we do, the community that we share, that all of us need sometimes, some of us need it more often than others, and then the outreach that we try and carry to the community beyond our walls and our gate in our. The question is really, what does it take? Our community consists of a staff as well as paid staff. It includes the clergy and part-time lay, the organist, the bookkeeper, the parish administrator, and the sexton, and then a host of volunteers that carry the brunt of all of the nitty-gritty work beyond the operation of the physical plant. The cost of that staff is not inconsequential at $165,000. In addition to payroll, we have facilities costs for the church, maintaining it and heating it and lighting it. In the parish house, the same. We have costs associated with the parking lot, costs for maintenance and utilities and property taxes and insurance. That's an additional $70,000. The operating of the office, postage and printing and office supplies and software and debt service. We, 11 years ago, borrowed a very substantial amount of money to restore the roof on the church, and we are slowly paying that back. So we have debt service to pay. The cost of that operation is $29,000, not inconsequential. We also have an outreach program, a very substantial one, a costly one, but through the grace of God and some enormously generous benefactors way back when, there is a BOM fund. It's called the Restricted Endowment Income Fund. It's a fund that was set up so that the revenue that comes from it, which is invested in the stock market, can pay a substantial amount for our outreach, but it has to be spent on the poor in Newport County. So that's $10,000. We also support the diocese, as does every other church in the diocese. In all the diocesan programs, probably the most profound one for us was they offered us and sent us Della as soon as they ordained her past June. She very quickly came to us and has been our mainstay ever since. So our apportionment to the diocese is about $50,000. So if you add all of those up, it's a very substantial amount, $324,000 to keep Emmanuel operating as we understand it before COVID, as we understand it getting through COVID, and as we understand it in COVID today, and hopefully we will escape those binds and bounds in the not terribly distant future. So that's what it costs. So how do we get there? Well, in years past, we pretty substantially demonstrated that the plate and pledge, that's the amount of money that people put in the plate every Sunday, or that they send from their checking account if they mail in their pledges. We have budgeted in the past $160,000 in the current year. That by the year end, we will be close to that. We're marching in that direction. It's almost the end of October, so it won't be long before we've got November and December, and then we'll see where we stand. But $160,000 for pledge income. Unrestricted income is another pair of funds, endowment funds, that were generously donated years and years ago, that are able to produce revenue from those investments that we can spend on the operation of the programs at Emmanuel Church, on budget, on maintenance, utilities, payroll, all our expenses. Unrestricted, we can use it as we see fit. There's also that restricted bond fund that I mentioned. It's restricted for assistance to support the poor. It's really a pass-through fund. That fund, which delivers $10,000 a year to us, is for us to deliver to the poor. So although we show it on the income and the expense side, it's really a pass-through. We're also extraordinarily fortunate when our benefactors years ago, Mrs. Brown in particular, established the foundation of Emmanuel Church. They very wisely put 2 apartments in, and they put an office space above the library and beyond the library. And we've been able to rent those out, and our rental income anticipated pretty accurately, I believe, for next year will be $94,000, a not inconsequential amount. We have also in the past rented parking spaces. Before COVID, when parking was in heavy demand, we were able to rent it to local neighbors who desperately wanted a secure, predictable place to park. So many of the people in the community, in the immediate neighborhood, would rent parking from us, and that was a substantial part of our overall revenue source. Because of COVID, that hasn't been the case. There have not been so many tourists, so there hasn't been so much pressure on parking, so there haven't been as many people looking to rent parking from us. So I put parking in there. We know we'll be able to rent some. We can't figure out how to anticipate exactly what that's going to be yet. So I put that in there as a placeholder, not to ignore it, but it's an unknown. And I've listed community partners. You know, we were blessed for years and years with the Emmanuel Day School. The Emmanuel Day School was able to pay a very substantial portion of our operating expense, on the order of $20,000 a year. Much of the tuition that was paid by the students was more than was required to pay the salaries of the staff. So the difference was essentially used to pay the utilities that school took, and the insurance that the school took, and the operating of the office that the school used. So that's no longer part of our revenue stream. So we built in a $35,000 community partner to help us meet that $324,000 total revenue source stream that we'll need to reach our expected expenses. Endowment income. There's really 2 sources of it. Unrestricted. There's one called a Mercer Fund. We don't hold custody to it, but it gives us income. It's very modest, $1,250 a year. The Brown Fund is held by the Rhode Island Foundation. There's $224,000 there. It's now been placed in the Rhode Island Foundation. We no longer have access to it. We cannot draw down the $224,000. We are only entitled to and legally have access to the income from it, which is on the order of $9,000, just about 4%. The endowment world sees a drawdown of 4 to 4.5% that's sustainable over an extraordinarily long period of time. And that's the restriction that's been imposed on us by the diocese. It's something that's watched over carefully by the state. The Attorney General's office has a division that oversees endowment operations and helps people who don't manage them the way they ought to find the wisdom in changing their operating structures. So that fund has $108,000 in it. So if we stay within the 4% range, 4.5% range for Rockland, that's another 4,000 and change. But I'm hopeful that we won't have to tap into that. The bond fund is restricted, as I said, only for the poor, $10,000. We also have a Parker fund that has $63,000 in it, but it's also restricted. We may use all of the revenue from that fund as long as we do not go below $50,000 to maintain the organ. So there's $13,000 in the Parker fund that we are tapping into a little bit right now because we had a major casualty of the organ, a major component of the air movement system that keeps the music flowing, failed after a very long period of time, and that's being restored right now. So that will eat into that $13,000 surplus. Also a higher education fund that people may not be aware of. It's a fund that has a little bit less than $9,000 in it, but it is available as parishioners need if they have education expenses for their children, for college, for example. They can come to that higher education fund and petition for a grant to help support their educational expenses. That's an as needed. So we don't have anything budgeted in that. You can't use it for anything other than education. So that's pretty much our limit on employing that fund. Much the extent of what I have to present. If you have questions, I would be delighted to answer them offline. I can be reached easily through the website for Emmanuel Church. There's a contact us little icon somewhere in there. If you click on that icon and say, hi, I have a question about the budget presentation that Dave Monroe presented, ask away, and somebody in the mystery of how it works will find that message and get it to me. So I'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I wonder if you could keep your screen up, because I wonder if Lil can comment a little bit on the history of this and just talk a little bit about this. Lil, can you see the screen? I know we're all in separate places observing COVID.
I see the
quarantine. Endowment
endowment income. Yeah.
Just wanted to hear your historical perspective, because you've known these numbers for a long time and worked with them. Have those changed over the years?
It used to be, you could ask how much was in the endowment, and it wasn't quite as involved with the different funds. I can remember being on the vestry a long time ago, and they said, yes, there was $1 million in the endowment. And warned at the time that it was going down because we kept drawing from it. And that's what happened. It's very interesting. From what I understand, many churches to the west of us, churches that have not been around as long as us, never had endowments in the first place. When they built churches, it was with the agreement that all the people involved were the ones that were going to support it, and that's the way it continued. And so they have never relied on endowment income, completely opposite of what we do.
Oh, that's interesting. So you might have even counted on that endowment income, and even a little more than the income, maybe some of the savings themselves, to operate the church. Do I hear that correctly?
Yes, you do.
Wow. Dave, could you tell us, do you know what the balance is in the endowment now? That may be too complicated a question for the moment, but is it $1 million still?
Oh, if only it were. The endowment balance as of the end of September was $616,000 and change. However,
oh, wow.
$616,000, approximately $284,000 of it is permanently restricted. So
Wow.
the fund that is BOM, that's the fund that's Parker, the higher education, The unrestricted available to spend on operations is 332,000.
So just to say that in plain words for people like me who are new to this situation, the endowment is a little bit less than, not a little bit, it's quite a bit less than half of what it was originally.
It's a third of, it was over $1 million by a slight amount. I think in 1970, about 50 years ago.
So what does that mean?
History of it, but it.
In practical terms, does that mean that we have to find money from other sources in order to keep the church operating the way we remember it and the way we know it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We need to be able to do all of these things: pay salaries, maintain the church and the insurance, and pay property tax. We pay property taxes to the city of Newport. Churches don't generally do that. We pay taxes because we have income generated from renting parking lot spaces. We have income generated from renting apartments and the office space, and rental property has tax associated with it, where church property for church purposes does not. But because
that's an interesting point, because
Right.
I thought that churches didn't pay taxes. So you're saying churches do pay taxes in certain circumstances.
Under certain circumstances they do. Because the steeple houses a Verizon antenna for cell phone service, and Verizon pays us a rental income for the privilege of having their service devices in the steeple, we pay some tax associated, I believe, with the steeple rental.
Wow. Okay. But then that we get more money from that to contribute to the cost of our operations.
Oh, yes.
I see.
Absolutely. If you look at what I've listed here for rental income, it's $94,000 in my judgment for 2021. Steeple, parking lot, apartments, and the office. All those combined, 94,000. However, we have to pay insurance on all of it. We have to heat all of that. Well, we don't heat the steeple. We heat the apartments, we heat the church. Not an inconsequential amount of money to operate Emmanuel Church.
Wow. Well, that's
why we're
really
looking.
to understand that. I noticed on the other slide that you included in our resources that we have a lot of volunteers. That's an important point, isn't it? Lil, what's your perspective on that? Under staff, you list volunteers. I think volunteers must do a lot of work around here.
They do an awful lot of work, and first I would say, and everybody has to realize, they do not get paid, and they spend countless hours. And if I start listing, I know I'm going to forget somebody, but they take care of the property, they cut the grass, they volunteer in the office, they have the hydroponics program, they're in the altar guild, our crucifer volunteers all the time. They now do Sunday setups, there's counters, and on and on and on for all the different people that volunteer and cost us nothing.
Wow. That's an important part, because if you counted those staff hours, if we were paying staff to do that, the budget would be much higher, wouldn't it?
Yes, it would.
We could not afford it. We cannot exist without volunteer support.
Mm.
Very quickly.
And so, Lil, in your experience, you were saying earlier that for a long time, I think this is interesting about churches on the East Coast, and particularly in New England, they were usually endowed, I think you said, by whoever gave them and built them. And so maybe people in church aren't as used to, in this environment, pledging and caring for the church with their own financial resources. Is that true? Do I hear that correctly?
I apologize. Would you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. That was kind of convoluted. I heard you say that churches in New England were often endowed.
Right.
And that people in churches that were built later, that were not endowed, from the beginning, knew they had to pay pledges to support their churches.
Yes, they had to support, yeah.
That's
Definitely.
less common to the experience in New England. That's the part I was kind of wondering about.
Right, right. I think it's also a difference. People that do pledge, I think, feel more of an ownership for their church. Whereas, I think we have to decide sometimes, is this just a nice little thing we do for an hour on a Sunday? Or is this our, as it were, home away from home, and we really have to support it?
So are you saying that it makes a greater connection if you're connected to the church with your donor dollars, your money and your time?
Certainly would.
Do you think you have a more meaningful connection with the church because of all the time you spend here and the gifts you give?
I would certainly say yes. And I can also say that every important decision that I've probably ever made was somehow or other connected to the church.
That's a big testament. Yeah. And I know that's how I feel. What's the passage I'm thinking of? Where your treasure is, your heart will be.
Right.
I remember that correctly. I think that's what I hear you saying, and I know that's my experience too.
Somewhere along the line, I also read, check your checkbook and see where your money goes. And that's where your main interest is. And golly, Emmanuel Church was written an awful lot of times in my
Yeah. Well, do you have any final good words for us, Lil, in this conversation? And we're in our third week of the fall 2020 pledge campaign, and our commitment Sunday is October 25th. Do you have anything more to say to all of Emmanuel gathered out there watching us now?
Well, two things. The gifts assessment was included in the letter to the parish, and that would bring us more volunteers to do our important work. And also seriously consider your pledge, and if you possibly can increase it, or think seriously about it, not just can I give a small amount, but maybe I can give till it hurts a little bit.
Yeah. Those are really meaningful words in this context. Dave, do you have any final words on the budget?
Only that it's uncertain times, and that we're working very hard to make it all come out right. I know that there's a monumental effort underway to try and identify others in the community who could benefit by using our enormously valuable and attractive resources, the church, the parish house. It would be nice if we were sharing that with others who would help us share the future together. And I think we're the vestry, and I know that's where Della is helping us move. So I have great hope.
So the letter I was remembering to close us off here today, in the King James version of the Bible, which I think that often people of my generation and older love because of the words, and may even have this in your memories. It's from Matthew 6:21. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And that is the centerpiece of our pledge campaign. Thank you all for this conversation. Thank you, Lil, for your debut on Zoom. And this will conclude our conversation today.